or like offsite needs. Business planning is an area that I focus on. I also work with some other organizations on land access, connecting farmers with USDA programs. And then I have a small farm in St. Paul, very small garden. So I actually was an employee of Big River Farms for about 6 years back in 2010. And when I started that work, I realized pretty quickly there wasn't anyone focusing on business plan assistance with small scale production in this area anyway, in the Twin Cities. And it definitely wasn't an area I had expertise in or was interested in, but just saw the need. And so kind of dove in and started to get more familiar with business plans, especially for small scale farms. So as Matt mentioned, that's an area that I work with Big River Farms farmers on, outside of the kind of staff there and the current programming. And I'll get into that a little bit more at the end, what that looks like. So I'm curious as to where everyone's at with business planning, what can you think of? So I'd love to just hear some thoughts from all of you. What are some associations you have with business plans, or what words come to mind when you think of business planning?
Budget.
Strategy. Organizations.
Making some profit after covering expenses.
Yep, making some profit after covering expenses. Details.
Registrations and tax ID number.
Registrations, tax ID number.
Insurance.
Insurance. Planning, yeah, definitely planning. Yeah, those are great. Those are all key parts. Are there any specific words other than what you said that you think of that are like components or elements of a business plan? Anything that you've heard that's involved, that's part of a plan?
Vision.
Vision, yep.
Vision and the vision, mission, and I can't remember the third one though.
Okay, yeah, vision, mission, definitely.
How about market?
Markets,
Return on investment.
What's that?
ROI, return on investment.
Okay. Return on investment, yeah. Yep. Fancier. Yeah. And then another question, how do you feel right now about business plans? Are you engaged with that process? Have you started? Is it, something that's nagging you in the back of your mind? Is it all new? New? Okay. 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 Good. So this class is really an introduction to what's the elements of a business plan, what's involved, and what makes sense for you to start working on. So we're not going to go into too much detail on any one aspect. We have another class coming up in March where we'll be doing a lot more in-depth look at financials. So really going into detail on financial statements and assessing profitability and all of that. But this is really an introduction to kind of hopefully bring clarity to what's in a business plan, and specifically a farm business plan, and also what's important to you to have in that plan. All plans are different, and I know that was confusing for me when I first started looking at them. Is that there's different components of plans, and so you can customize what's relevant to you. So that's our focus today. So we hear that we need to have business plans, but really, what is a business plan and why is it so important? I think it's important to understand. I don't want people to work on things that they don't understand the value of. So I think figuring that out first before you start the process can be really helpful and motivating. So really simply, it's your farm story. It gives, describes your farm, it's a description of what you're doing, your products, your markets. It also goes into the future, projects and looks at what you're going to be doing in the future. And it has a vision to it. Like you mentioned, it describes how you see things, how you want your farm to look. And that's a really important part, but also with that vision, you need to have numbers to back it up. So it is based in reality, it is doable, and it is operating as a business. So it's helpful to have a plan to show other people. Sometimes it's essential, like for a loan. And like I was saying, ideally, it's really helpful to you as well and to your farm team. So thinking through what parts are important for that. And like I was saying, it can be different depending on what you want it to do. So one thing, just to clarify, I think a business plan is really important in deciding if you want to farm as a hobby or as a business. A lot of people farm because they love to farm. There's so many values in being outside and growing your own food, and to grow as a hobby and not with a focus on profitability. Totally fine. It's great, and more people should do it. I mean, there's nothing saying that you need to have a business. But if you decide you want to have a business, then you need to clarify that, and a business plan is really a great way to do that. It shows that you want to make a profit, and that is one of your goals in growing food or raising livestock.
Question, can you do both?
Yeah. I mean, definitely, if you're growing as a business, you can have aspects that are just as a hobby. So you might have some animals on the side where that's not part of your business plan. You don't care about making a profit there. Maybe you're growing one crop for profit, and then you grow 20 other ones just for your family. So is that kind of what you were, does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you definitely do both. It gets a little confusing as to what you can write off when it comes to your expenses. So it doesn't have to be confusing, but that would be the thing to think about in doing that. So today, like I was mentioning, we have kind of 3 goals. One is to really determine what's your purpose in writing a business plan. So you know why you're doing it, and we'll talk about what some of those different goals are. And then to create an outline for the content that you're going to put in your plan. So like I was saying, they aren't all the same, and depending on what your goal is, you're going to come up with a different list of things to include. And then creating a task list so you know what you need to be doing in order to reach some of those goals. So what are some purposes of a business plan? What are some thoughts that you all have as to why you would write a business plan? For loans, yep. A big one. To follow through some of your plans. Define your roadmap. Yep.
Plan.
Yeah, to plan your budget. To make money.
Convince yourself that what you're doing is good.
Yeah, to convince yourself what you're doing is good. Yeah, okay. Especially when you get discouraged from some of those long days out there in the field.
Maybe more of an alignment with your stakeholders, if multiple people are doing it together.
Yeah, yep, in alignment with stakeholders or your farm team. Nice, good. So I don't have to convince you all too much, you know the reasons. Yeah, so to guide business decisions, you all said, so if you want to invest in something, does it make sense to buy a tractor now or a new piece of washing equipment? Being able to look at the numbers. Also thinking about where your money's gonna come from. So with farming, a lot of expenses are in the spring before you have any income. So planning where that's gonna come from. Maybe you need a loan or you have to do some planning there. Just general decisions about where you're gonna sell. If you're thinking of taking on a new market or a new crop, how does that affect your plan? Yeah, I kind of mentioned these feasibility, looking at a new enterprise, maybe you're doing value added or like a new crop, does that make sense? And then that's the idea of if you have more than one person farming, if you're a team, family, partners, being able to make decisions together. And so, like I was saying, you might focus on different parts of the plan for different reasons. The values and vision might be a really important part for making decisions as a team. So you can go back to those and those that you agreed on in the beginning, you made those together. And then when it comes in the season to a decision, you can make sure it lines up with the things you already decided are important to you. So definitely profitability. Yeah, so really what do your numbers say? Again, if you decide to farm as a business, that does mean you want to make a profit. How you define that profit, can be different. Farming is not a highly profitable business, as I hate to break it to you if you don't know that, but it requires careful management to make a profit. So really being aware of how your decisions affect that. Just being aware of your family expenses, how much are you relying on off-farm income? How much does the farm need to make? So just having all those numbers together so you can make those decisions. If it's a goal to quit your full-time job or to work less, how does that play into your plan? And then just, if you hope to, starting out, you might not make a profit. It might be a 5-year plan until you make a profit, as is common for a lot of businesses. So, when can you start seeing that profit? And I think an important thing that we tend to not look at with farming as much when it comes to a business plan is your price. So what you're setting your prices at. It's hard with food because you can't just decide you're going to charge $7 for a bunch of carrots. You have a hard time selling them when you're competing with a price that's set by grocery stores and other farmers. But it's still important to know what you need to charge in order to at least not lose money. And maybe there's some crops that just aren't worth growing if you can't charge what you need to. So I know Kristen was talking about that this morning, and it can get complicated when you're doing a per crop profit analysis, but even having a general sense of your income and expenses, so if you're charging enough or not. Definitely financing. I'll say this is probably the biggest motivator for people to get loans or for people to do their business plan. And those loans are going to require some specific parts of a business plan. Definitely more of a focus on the numbers. If you're looking at financing from other sources, like an investor or maybe crowdfunding, like GoFundMe, the numbers will probably be somewhat important, but there you're more selling your story. So that vision development, that description of your farm is going to be really important to convince people that you have a valid cause that they should donate to or invest in. Another reason, similar, not exactly financing, but crop insurance or farm insurance is going to need your numbers, your records, kind of a plan to get coverage. So in thinking about a business plan, I kind of broke it into 2 categories. One is really the elements of the plan. So these important parts, so your vision. Vision in your farm description, and that can be current, and that can also be future, you know, what you hope to get to. It's a description of your experience. So kind of what are you bringing to the table? Why are you doing this? Or not why you're doing this, that's more of your vision, but why can you do this? What experience are you bringing? What skills? Do you have records? Those are a great way to describe what you've done in the past. Then there is the analysis. So what have you learned from what you've done? What have you learned from other people, what other people have done? And then planning, so that's often the biggest piece, is then what's in your plan? How are you going to carry out this vision? And so for farming, I like to look at 4 different areas to do all of those key parts. So the different areas of farming that I would break it down into are production, markets, management, and finances. So for each of those areas, so you'll go through that important parts list. So for production, think of, you know, what's your vision for production? What's your production records, production analysis, and your production planning? Or you think of, you start with your farm vision and description, and you describe your production, markets, management, and financing. So either way, go through it. So this is a lot of words up here. This is one of the handouts that Leslie came around with. That's Farm Business Plan Outline at the top. Like this. So this is just getting into those 4 key parts that I were on the previous slide, and going through each of them in detail. So this really is the outline, you know, what you would need to include for a complete business plan. You can do it very simple, or it can get really complicated. But a simple business plan would really just, you know, focus on these parts, and you could, you know, even have 1 sentence for each. If you just want a very simple, something to describe what you're doing. Again, it depends on what the purpose of having this plan is. But, you know, describing in a few sentences your current farm and what you want to do. Your experience, if you have records, that would be something usually you would show in more of a spreadsheet, but you could describe, you know, just your years of experience, where you've been farming. Again, just a few sentences. Analysis, you could even skip for a really simple plan, and just jump right to what you want to do with your farm, you know, how you want to grow it, what your plans are. And that just kind of gives you a real simple start to get something on paper if the process of writing a business plan feels overwhelming.
So would the analysis would be like an analysis of the market, or, you know, the field of farming that you want to get into, in, let's say, Twin Cities or something, would be.
Yeah, yep. So the analysis can be done in a lot of different ways, and it can be, when you think of like a business plan, maybe not related to farming, I think the analysis has a big part in that plan. And yeah, you're doing the market analysis. Can I sell this product? How much can I sell it for? And it's based on research more. That's a little bit less relevant with farming because we kind of know the landscape for food. It's a little bit less variable. So I think it's gonna be more, I use it as more of a personal analysis of analyzing your own production, your markets, and what works and what doesn't work. So just a little more detail on the farm description and vision. So it's an introduction and a summary at the same time of your business. So this is basically an outline for a guidebook that I use to work on, to go through a business plan. And so this is an overview. This is not enough information to really work on it yourself. But gives you an idea of what would be involved. And so for each of these things, there's like a worksheet that you would work on to really define what your values are. I think a good question to ask is, why do you farm? I think that gets at what your values are that you're bringing. And what are your goals? What do you hope to accomplish with your farm business? And then a mission statement is really common with any business plan. Basically, why does your business exist? So again, mission statement's important, definitely, to, again, remind yourself on those days when you're not feeling it. But there's a clear reason why farms exist. And so it's a little bit less selling that idea than maybe another product. Farm description is pretty basic. Just describing, again, those different areas, your production, your markets, your management, your finances. It's also helpful to have kind of a history of your business, and a scale of production and your growth. So again, these are really a summary of your business. And so some people like to start with this. The visioning can be a fun exercise to do, especially if you have a team, to make sure everyone's on the same page. It's, can be inspiring to do the dream of, write down your dream farms, and get some of those things on paper. It's also important to do the planning and then come back to this after you got to those details on paper. Then you come back and you might adjust things a little bit as part of your summary. So then your farm experience is a really key part of the plan. It is your base for planning. And this is what tells funders, especially a loan officer, that you have credit, that you know what you're doing, and that you have a reason to make these projections that you plan, of what you plan to produce and sell. Not everyone keeps great records, and it can hurt your chances of getting a loan. But you can also, there is room there to talk about your experience in more of a, not so much a spreadsheet form, but a narrative form, or to write, a paragraph about your experience. You might be bringing experience from your childhood or from another country, or working on another farm can count as experience, or education, gone to school for farming. So you don't always have those records, but they are a very important thing if you do have them, if you are farming. Thinking of your, describing your experience, like I said, I can include all those things: education, skills, backgrounds. If you have more than one person on your farm team, most likely they're all bringing a different skill set. So, identifying that is helpful. So the farm analysis, I kind of look at it in two different ways. One is really, like I was saying, it's an analysis of your own farm. So that's your annual farm reports. So I think if you've been at Big River Farms, you've done that. And that's just, you have these records, and what are you doing with them? What's the purpose of these records? Hopefully you're not just, you might just keep them because you're told you have to, but they really can provide a lot of information. And so, but putting them in a useful form is essential. So if you use Excel, putting them in that spreadsheet. If you use, another farm record keeping app, if you use a notebook, to keep your records, that's great. That's awesome to have records that way. But then taking some time at the end of the year to work with someone or on your own, enter them into a spreadsheet that can give you some helpful information. And I've done a whole separate class on that, so. Yeah, we won't get into that, but yeah.
This business, not business work, you know, if your business is not successful, are you able to go back into the business plan? What fails or
Yes. Yes, definitely. That is a huge part of this analysis piece. So the question was, you know, if some part of your business is not successful, can you go back to your business plan and try to figure out why? That's a huge reason to have a business plan. And that's often why I get stuck with farmers is we need those records. You know, they'll say my farmers are profitable. What can I change? You know, how can business planning help me? Well, we can't just project into the future based on other people's farms. We need to, if you're trying to improve your farm. So we need to start with your records and looking at, you know, categorizing your different expenses and, you know, and where what your sales are, and then try to really figure out, well, what, maybe there's expenses you could cut. Can you do like a bulk order on anything? And then looking at your prices, you know, maybe you're just not charging enough. So yes, that is a key part of the analysis, is going back, trying to figure out, you know, what's not adding up or what can change. Yeah, yep. Yeah, so that's exactly, you know, one of the main things you want to learn from those records. And so, you know, you might have other goals that you've listed for your farm for that year. So when you go back and review your records, you're also looking at, you know, maybe your goal was specifically to have a less loss of crops in the fields. You know, maybe you're losing 50% to gophers, or so you really need to focus on pest control. Then, so if you look at those things, you know, it can become really obvious when you look at the numbers what's happening that you might think you know without doing that, but when things add up, you can see more clearly what you need to focus on. And then a more formal business analysis way to look at your plan is the SWOT analysis. So that stands for your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I don't always feel that this is super relevant. I think a lot of these things come up in easier ways just by looking at your records and talking about your experience. But it can be helpful to really break down, you know, what are the strengths that everyone, you or the members of your team are bringing to the farm. So that's kind of the skills, the background, the management experience. Is someone really good with mechanics? Does someone have 10 years, you know, working on a tractor on a farm? So, you know, what are those skills you're bringing? The weaknesses are, where do you not have experience? Often it is around those mechanics or the building or things that are a little outside of farming, but at least here in this country, we require like small farmers to really be able to do a lot of things, including like marketing, which is something that not a lot of farmers strengths. It's not, you know, what gets people into farming. So, so identifying those weaknesses can help you look for those outside of your team, or make sure you're thinking about those and knowing that that could be a place where you could potentially, you know, have a problem. Opportunities. So opportunities is kind of outside of your business, so the environment around you. So a little bit less relevant with farming because everyone needs food, so there's always an opportunity to sell. But you could get specific. You know, maybe in your neighborhood, there's an opportunity to join like a local farmers market or a stand right there. You know, I think in general, the opportunities are growing in Twin Cities for local food. So there may be more of a demand. So thinking through some of those things, if that feels relevant. And then threats, so again, like things outside of your farm business and the environment around you, what are some threats? Yeah, I would say the obvious one is weather for farming. Although pest, disease, these are all some of the threats. So, thinking through how you're gonna be prepared to deal with those. Any questions on like the analysis part of a business plan? I think, and then the farm projections or the plans of your operation, this is, really what we think of, I think, when we put the business plan in the name. And it can take this part can take a lot of work, depending again on how detailed you want to get. Again, it comes back to what is your real goal in this plan. But breaking down those different areas, so production, what will you produce? How will you produce it? And I have these listed under, it says narrative. So I think of your plans as in two forms. You have a description with words describing what you're doing, and then you have numbers. So you have those in a table or spreadsheets that back up what you described. So, describing your products, how are you going to do it? Is it going to be, farmed organically? What kind of scale? All those things. Your markets, describing where you're going to sell. It's going to be direct markets, wholesale. What is your marketing plan? So that might be if people focus on that different ways. Are you just going to sell to the Good Acre and that's your plan? Or are you really going to, promote your farm and go door to door to restaurants and try to sell that way? The management, so who is part of your team is a big piece of that, and who does what. Talks about that. I think that the timeline is also really important here. Thinking, especially if you're thinking of growing, like scaling up. I see a lot of plans where people, scale up every year, they're doubling their acreage, but their management plan doesn't change. So there's no change in how much labor is devoted to the farm, or so they're buying a tractor, or there's no clear, plan to account for those additional hours in labor. So that's kind of your management plan. How are you gonna manage your time and the tasks that you have to do? Also with your management is identifying risks. So we kind of talked about that in the analysis. What are your risks? And then, what risk management strategies do you have? So is that farm insurance? Is it planting a diverse variety of crops? So if you have a hot season and your broccoli doesn't do well, then your tomatoes will do well. So, how are you thinking about that? Because there's going to be problems. Usually not everything goes well or perfect. So, and you don't often know what those problems are going to be. So, are you thinking about that? Threats? Yeah, it's pretty much the same. Yeah, that's a good question. Is risk different than threats? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll think of those as the same. I also put management, like how do you legally organize your business? So some of those things that came up earlier when we were talking about business planning, associations. So yeah, what's the structure of your business? Are you an LLC, sole proprietor? What's your business insurance? So these are all kind of risks related to risk management. And then financial, just the basics of how are you projecting your farm budgets, will it be profitable? What is your income? What are your sales gonna be? And what will your expenses be as those sales change? But then also, how do you think about your business equity? So are you investing in your business? So, if you buy a tractor, that's spending some of your profits, but those profits don't go anywhere. They're in that tractor. So now you have that equity. So that is building your business. So even if you show, a zero profit at the end of the year, if you've acquired new equipment or invested in things, that's still growing your business. In essence, you're showing a profit, it just shows up in a different form. And we'll get into those financial forms a little bit. And again, how you finance your business. So thinking about that, the timing of expenses and income. And then having a plan, keeping records, that should be part of your plan.
So if you have like you register your business as an LLC and then you buy a tractor, is the LLC on the tractor?
Yes. I mean, you can set it up differently. It depends on what you do on your tax statement. So if you're including it as an expense of the farm business, then yes, the LLC would own it. I think an easier example is cars, your vehicle. So if you buy a farm vehicle, you can deduct the whole cost of that, but it needs to solely be a farm vehicle. You don't use it for other driving, and then you deduct the cost of gas, of any repairs, of anything related to that vehicle. Insurance, yep. But if you have a vehicle you use for both, the farm and personal, then you would not deduct those costs. You would only deduct mileage. So either way, you have, it's related to your business expenses, but tractor, yeah, I mean, if you, it's probably mainly to be farm use unless you're doing like plowing for your neighbors or something, but yeah. I think setting up an accounting system is really important. I see that often that farmers don't have a good sense of, especially if you're doing wholesale and you're doing invoicing, being able to keep track to show that you've gotten paid for those invoices. You cannot rely on the people you're selling to keep track. There's a lot of mistakes that happen, and so having a good system where you're aware of your incoming payments. So then a lot of your projections are going to be in spreadsheets, are going to be in some chart form. So your production plan, it's really a crop plan. So, this is more of an annual plan, but it's part of your business plan. It's, showing, especially if you do a multiple year production plan, it's showing how, what you're doing with your production. Is it growing? Is it staying the same? And getting into those details, seeding, cultivating, harvest, post-harvest, the dates, the amounts, all of that. A marketing chart is also really important. If your goal is to sell most of your produce. So identifying, really how many pounds of potatoes are going to which markets and at what price. How many bunches of carrots are you growing for different markets and at what price? And I think that's one thing that Kristen touched on this morning is them working backwards, so you have that plan of where you're going to sell, and then you do your production plan based on that. A task management timeline. So again, just thinking through, how many people are involved? What are your real crunch times? Like planting in the spring can be a really busy time. Do you have extra help then? Just identifying when you need the most labor, different skill labor, and how you're going to manage that. And then financial forms are really important for that projection as well, looking at your farm budget, your cash flow, your balance sheets, which we'll see in a little more detail. Oh yeah, right here. So you know, numbers tell a lot. They don't tell everything. I think it's good to have that narrative description of what's going on with your farm. But yeah, we do rely a lot on looking at numbers as part of a business plan. So a profit and loss statement is usually what we call the record of your expenses and your income from the previous years. So that is in the past, the profit and loss. It's also called an income statement. And it's basically, it is the same as a Schedule F, which is what a lot of farmers file for their taxes. So these are all the same. So if someone's asking you about a Schedule F, if you have a profit and loss statement, you have a Schedule F. Maybe just didn't put it into that format and file your taxes that way. If you have a Schedule F, if you did that, it doesn't always mean you have a helpful profit and loss. If you don't have a Schedule F, you probably notice the categories are not very relevant to your type of production. So how many people here have done a Schedule F? Okay, well, they're not very helpful to your production. It's, you know, set up for crop, row crop, corn and soybean, or large scale dairy or other livestock. So if you're to, you know, analyze, go back and look at your expenses, Schedule F just really doesn't tell you much. So I always encourage people to start with the profit and loss and set up your categories, if that makes sense to you, your different accounts. Let me show you, I'll show you an example. A farm budget is really it's really the same as your profit and loss in how you set it up. It's just projected into the future. So you could even do it all on one spreadsheet. Let's see. So this is how, yeah, it's really hard to see. But basically at the top you have your income and you would list your, you know, the details of where it's coming from, wholesale, direct, you can list specific accounts. And then the operating expenses is kind of the key, how you set that up to, if you're gonna then be able to analyze it effectively later. You really wanna set up these categories to remain the same every year, so you can then compare your so I have it broken down to like seeds and plants, fertilizer, fuel, chemicals, advertising supplies, greenhouse supplies, production supplies, packing supplies, small tools, irrigation, capital purchases, special projects, equipment repair, whole farm repair, contracted work, and land lease, and then a farm share of like taxes, utilities, insurance. So every farm is different. So thinking about what categories make the most sense for your farm, and then keeping them the same so you can really compare it year to year. So there's 3 columns for 3 different years. So this is the profit and loss. So these would be years in the past. So you know, 2020, 2021, and 2022. And then for your projections, you could just add more columns for 2023, 2024, and do the same thing. This one is broken down, or this one just shows income, projected income, because it was too small to see anything with the whole sheet. But you can see the plans here. The top includes like the production area, so you can see there's a plan to grow a little bit more, in a little more space every year. And those income amounts, you know, increase. So this isn't finished. So I would, you know, yeah, so you would break that down, like that 2,500 for edible flowers could be broken down. How much is going to Bitter Cube? How much is going to that new restaurant, the second new restaurant? And the same for plant starts, breaking down that 6,000 for wholesale or home plant starts. So the more detail, the better. Yeah, and then your expenses down below would also show an increase. But with those same categories, then you're able to, one, it's easier to then project. But then later on, it's easier to analyze too. So then the cash flow is similar to your budget, it's the future. You're looking at how your money, it's more specifically looking at how the timeline of how your money is coming in and going out. So in January, you might have a lot of money going out in expenses, but no money coming in. So, how are you going to finance that? Do you have savings from the year before that you held in your business account, or do you need a loan? You can get a small operating loan for $1,000. That's all you need, and you pay it off by July. So it's not a big risk, but it's get you that money up front. It doesn't. There's also credit cards, but that's always a bit risky. So I didn't do a cash flow statement to share. But it's basically just another spreadsheet looking at the timeline of when money's coming in and going out. A balance sheet, I also didn't do an example, but it's pretty easy to describe in that it's like I was talking about the tractor. So to a lender, a balance sheet is really important. It just creates that full picture of your farm wealth, your farm equity, as well as your liabilities. So, if you have a lot of debt on a building or a vehicle, that's the lender's going to want to know that. But I think more importantly, is the assets. Just to let people know that when you're buying stuff for your farm, it really is still seen as part of your profitability, and it's really important to building your business equity, your business wealth, like investing in equipment, tools. If you're renting land, you're not currently building equity in the land, but you can be building equity in your equipment. In other situations, you might be able to build equity in a building if you're leasing land somewhere and are able to build. So I think, as when I work with people on accessing land, ownership is often a goal, and that's great. But there's sometimes an intermediate period, and in that period, there's a way to build your business equity and get yourself ready for that ownership, and that is through investing in equipment. So your non-farm income is also really relevant to this financial picture. It's like 95% of farms rely on outside farm income in this country. So your financial picture needs to include what other income is coming in, because with a farm business, it's not just as separate as some other businesses. It's really part of your life, because often it doesn't. If you buy a farm, it does include housing. So when you buy a farm and you have a mortgage payment, that's both your living expense and your farm expense. So it's kind of all looked at together. And yeah, like I said, farms usually need outside income. Farm business itself is usually not profitable enough to pay for the land, the house, and all your other operating expenses. So as well as your living expenses on top of the mortgage. And doing a multiple year budget is pretty helpful to see how you're going to grow. So again, a lot of these financial things are really related to taking a loan out, but also some of the basic ones super helpful to you as a farmer to know. Again, if you're losing money or if you're making money, if it's a viable business, or what you need to change to become more profitable. Yeah, I don't have a lot of detail on the financial slides, because that, like I was saying, is one more detail in another class, but just a kind of a brief overview of the farm budget. Like I was saying, it's based off your profit and loss. You know, really looking at where you can reduce expenses, making those capital investments. And so when I say capital investments, those are some of those equity building things. And it's important that I feel like as you get into your business financials, to work with a tax accountant, and that's who really can advise you on how to look at some of those costs, those capital investment costs, and how to depreciate them on your tax returns. But you know, I've heard there's different ways, there's different things I've heard from other farmers about what their goal is for their income and how they use it. One that's kind of stuck with me is this 30% arrangement, where of your annual income, you think of like 30% of that going back into annual operating costs, your seeds, your fertilizer, maybe some small tools, any packaging supplies. 30% going into capital investment, so reinvesting in the farm, whether that's, again, equipment, or if you own your farm, you know, is it putting up another greenhouse or a packing shed. And then 30% is profits for your living expenses.
Is that 30% is standard, or it depends on?
I think I think it's a good goal. I don't know how standard it is. What I really want is a project that talks to, you know, maybe 50 different farms in this region in Minnesota, and has the analysis of their income and their expenses, and whether this is standard or not. And I've seen some reports, nothing real local. And I would say that usually that 30% profit might be a little smaller than what I've seen. And that profit is usually, that includes the owner's pay. So that is not including like an owner's draw in your expenses, in your annual expenses. So it depends on if you know, how much you're paying for labor, and if you include yourself in that labor. So how you set that up can look a little different. Yeah, and I think it always kind of really surprises me how different, you know, farm business financials can look. I know Kristen mentioned this book in her workshop, and I don't know how much she said about it, but his whole, you know, he's a farmer on the East Coast, and describes his early farming career, you know, 10 years of not making hardly any profit, just long hours, struggling, no profit. And then, you know, was really spending time on just really analyzing finances, making everything more planned out, and just really looking at those numbers, that he then essentially changed to become much more profitable. And he talks about now it's more of a normal middle-class income that they get from farming. So, I mean, it's, you know, changing production efficiencies, having good markets, you know, a lot of different things. So I guess it's encouraging that there's always room to grow and to become more profitable. But I think the part that a lot of farmers aren't drawn to, that type of like detailed management is a key part of changing some of those ratios.
Can you, this is a funny dumb question, but I'm asking, can you bankrupt?
Oh, yes. And a lot of farmers did in the 80s. There was a major farm crisis in the 80s. It related to, you know, the the cost, the changing cost of corn and soybeans, and those commodity crops, and the cost of land. So a lot of farmers were losing their land. And that's when a lot of new programs started, like the Farm Service Agency, some more government support to the subsidies that we currently have in our farm bill for farmers. So there are more insurances now to not go bankrupt. But yeah, you definitely can. And I think one of the big takeaways from that time period has been that farmers don't rely solely on farm income. So there's usually one member of the household has an off-farm income to prevent that, just because there are so many risks in farming, and our country doesn't, I feel like doesn't hold food as important as it should, and we definitely need to take care of our farmers better. We need to change the price of food, which is hard because we want food to be affordable. So there's it's a real hard equation to figure out how to make farming more sustainable. But yeah, I think there's.
So, to prevent that, what are the government agencies? Do we get out or anything, you as a farmer, getting to the point where you're going dollar to dollar? Is there any agency that can get out or assist or anything? Because the loan itself is a biggie. I mean, at my age, I can't tell you now that I'm gonna go for farm loan. Because I definitely not gonna be able to get it. Not maybe they might not even give it to me based on my age. They're gonna say, oh, you're retiree, you're not gonna be able to pay this back. So are there agencies, government agencies out there that can allow or assist or anything?
Not super directly. I think, so with the Farm Service Agency, they do have some programs. One is their farm loan. And yeah, I mean, age is definitely not an equation in getting that loan or not. It's more it's based on your business plan, basically. Are you showing enough income to pay the mortgage? They have some disaster relief in that loan. So say your area has heavy flooding, if there's a disaster in your area, they will decide as a federal agency, that there's been a disaster in that area, and you don't have to make your payments that year. So you will not have to pay your mortgage. It doesn't go away, it just is added on. So now you have a 31-year mortgage. But that is part of that loan. There are some disaster relief programs. They're really directed towards large scale farms. There's some better farm insurance, and actually that's one thing I was going to mention at the end. They're developing a new micro farm insurance. It's part of the USDA. It's with Risk Management Agency, so not Farm Service Agency, and it's really geared towards small scale producers. And right now there's they're just developing it, so they want to do this kind of a pilot study to see how effective it is and if it's really affecting people's financials. So if anyone wants to participate, you get a $500 stipend to participate, but you do need to have some financial numbers to look at, and then you get this insurance. And there's you'll work with some different business management instructors. But anyway, so that's an opportunity I can share more about. You can ask me about, but that's to say that they're working on it. And that's a free insurance. So you can sign up for it without any cost. If you meet certain requirements, like beginning farmer, which everyone here would. So I can, yeah, so that study is going on, but I can share more information about that, how to sign up. Yeah, it is a little discouraging that some of the programs are very, because they don't make sense or inaccessible to smaller producers, especially crops. They call vegetables specialty crop, which is kind of weird to me that they, that they're the special ones and not the crops that we actually eat, as opposed to the larger scale commodity crops, corn and soy. Yeah. Actually, almost done here, but yeah. I know it's a lot, this is a lot of information, not the most exciting information to take in, so. Almost done. So, yeah, like I said, after you kind of work through all these topics, these areas, the numbers, plans, then you go back to that vision part that we started with. And most business plans, you know, the executive summary is the first part that someone will see. And so that often gets a lot of focus. That's, you know, a lot of people think of that as a key part of the business plan that might, again, it depends on who your your goal with this plan. A loan officer isn't really gonna care about that. They wanna see the details, the numbers. The investor, like, again, the crowdfunding, someone you're really selling the idea to, you know, you want a really good executive summary to describe your vision, and this is summary of everything you just worked on. So, you know, what's your profit gonna be? What's your growth gonna be? Just, you know, usually you want it to be less than a page, to really give people just a real quick picture of your business. And then the other part of putting your plan together is, you know, just summarizing all those different pieces and just putting it in like an outline. Basically, the outline that I handed out, that really is a template. You know, people ask a lot for a template that they can just fill in. And it really is as simple as those different categories we talked about and the different areas for each category. Do you guys want to take a little, I guess we have I don't know, maybe 10 more, 50 more minutes aside. Do you want to take a little break, or do you want to just keep going? Should be done to get it done. Take a break. Matt, do you usually have to take breaks?
Yeah, we can do a 10, 15-minute break. Interpreters need a break?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, thanks. Okay. So just not too much longer here. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, like what stage you're at with your farm and what makes sense to focus on for a business plan. If you're just starting, you obviously don't have the records to base projections off of. So your first year, every year, one of the main things to keep in mind is just keeping good records. It's a huge part of your business plan. So do that in your first year. You'll be well set to build your plan on top of that. But in your first year, you know, thinking about your vision and your goals, why you want to farm. And the staff at Big River Farms will work with you on creating a production plan and a marketing plan for this year, your annual plan. So that's something you're probably already working on with staff. And then at the end of the year, so really right now that's a big focus, is just, you know, why are you farming, what are your goals, and that annual plan. And at the end of the year, you'll have something to reflect on. So you can look back, do your annual report. You'll be able to, you know, look at those records, see what you learned from them, and then use that for your next year. So second year, you're taking into account what you learned as you set your new plans, your goals, revise your goals and your vision. And then this is the second year that I think focusing on a farm budget makes sense, because that first year, you don't know the cost, so it's really hard to budget. So using your profit and loss from the year before to make your farm budget. And again, keeping good records. Okay, thanks. So in the third year is really when it makes sense to start thinking about a full business plan. People have more material to review and analyze. So continuing to revise your goals and long-term vision. Diving deeper into financials can make sense at that point. Setting up an accounting system, and all those financial forms we talked about, really getting into those, in your third year. It's a good time to really, understand your profitability. You're probably thinking about, what's next after, if you're at Big River Farms, so after 3 years there. So, is it something you're gonna keep doing? Is it profitable? Yeah, what's your plan? Especially as, there's a lot of planning as you're thinking about any transition. There's transitioning from Big River Farms to your own land, or if you're leasing somewhere else and want to buy. So a lot of planning in that, to think about how your costs will change, what are the supplies you'll need. So, that's a really good time to spend a lot of effort into this. So I just have one slide, here about applying for a loan, since that is a common reason to focus on a business plan, it's the biggest motivator. I've mentioned Farm Service Agency. So they have a application, a specific, process for getting that loan. It basically is a business plan. I encourage people to not even look at their forms for their application, because again, it's not super relevant to vegetable farming, or small scale production. But thereafter, that's that information, that's your business plan, with a real focus on records and projections. And as well as those records, is they want to know like general experience, and that can replace some of those record requirements. Have demonstrated other agricultural experience. And there's a lot of complaints with Farm Service Agency about their requirements for their loans, but really the base, what they're doing is just wanting to make sure that your farm can make these payments for the mortgage. And so it's easy to project, it's easy to come up with, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna grow, an acre of beets, and I'm gonna sell it to this juice bar, and I'm gonna make this much money. But if you don't have experience, if you've farmed a year or more, that things don't go according to plan. And, you can go with a chart that says this is how many pounds you should get from your beets. And you can, make your plans on that, but then, you grow that first year and you may only get 20% of that harvest. There's so many things you don't know when you're just starting that are, that you need to build that experience so you have that confidence. And so it's not only for themselves that's an important thing, but it's really for you. So you don't get in a situation where, you decide this isn't for you, you decide it's not bringing in the money, and now you have this loan. So there's a reason those loans, they're really looking at your experience and then the plans you make off of that experience. But again, there is flexibility there, because not everyone falls into that. Everyone's different with what they're bringing to the table. So comp year is the same, any other farm lender. These are lenders, especially Farm Service Agency is a lender. If you cannot get a loan from a bank, that's when you would go to them. They're not basing a loan off of your credit or either your job, how long you've had your job, the things that a bank is going to look at. If you have this business plan and it looks valid, then that's what they're really basing it on. So yeah. And then the whole financial picture is really important when getting a loan, the balance sheets, non-farm income, and cash flow. So this is the worksheet I handed out. So kind of in the beginning, I touched on the goals of this class was, not to really complete any part of a business plan, but just to get you started with it. So we can just go through this real quick together. So, I want you to think about for you personally, or for your farm team, your farm group, what is the goal? Why would you write a business plan? Is there a purpose that you can identify? So if it's, your first year, maybe your purpose is, really just to get some goals on paper that you can try to meet this year. If you want to have a clear production plan, that's, a good part of your business plan. So you go into the season knowing what you're planning to grow. You have a plan in place for where you're gonna sell. If it's, if you're more interested in doing like the visioning and thinking through the values, maybe your reason is, to get on the same page with your team members for when as approaching this farm season, thinking about why you're doing this. Maybe it's for a loan. Maybe there's a small loan. Maybe you want to buy like a smaller tractor, or maybe you're just wondering where you're going to get the financing for your seeds this year. And then, so the second one is so this list of what to include in your business plan at this stage is, again, really what's relevant to you. So instead of listing, you could just look at this outline that was handed out and circle on here, like, what can I focus on this year? What makes sense? Without having records, you're not going to focus on analyzing your records. But you could write a paragraph about your experience, that maybe you bring from, your background. Maybe you do want to understand financials better, like your whole financial picture. So maybe that's something you want to focus on. If you have, 1 year of experience, or, something else that would be useful to create that picture. And then, thirdly, I think it's important to make some action steps for how you're gonna do these things. A task list that everyone could write is keeping good records. Would be helpful in accomplishing any business planning task. But maybe you have records and you really need to spend some time sorting through them. Maybe you have a pile of receipts that you haven't touched from last year. So maybe that's a goal. Maybe a goal is to set up a spreadsheet that you can enter information in throughout the season, so you don't feel overwhelmed at the end of the year with pieces of paper with records all over the place, like I usually have. Or maybe a task is to sit down, to have, half a day with whoever you're farming with and really think about, what's your vision, what are your goals, your values, and what that means for your business this season or in the future.
Can I ask a general question? So land is so crazy expensive, right? It's like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And like the revenue from farming, it's not a huge money maker, right? It's very hard to break even. It's a lot of work. So would it be reasonable to target buying non-buildable land? Because it's much cheaper, right? Instead of like $300,000, $400,000, find like 10, 15 acres, less than 100,000. It's not buildable. And then plan on putting like a trailer, mobile home on that land, if you want to live in it. Would that be a good strategy?
Potentially, but the importance there is in non-buildable lands, knowing why. Why is it non-buildable? I mean,
Because it's already another house is built on.
Oh, okay. So there's not, so it's land that's separated from, like, there's no building sites on that land.
Right, there won't be a permit to build.
Okay.
Somebody else
Okay.
already built.
Yeah, I mean, You probably couldn't put a trailer there, just if there's no like building site, unless the township allows like seasonal housing. But I guess the bigger question is it good farmable land? So it's really easy to be tempted by cheap lands and then to start farming on it and realize you're not getting much. So the price of land can really correlate to how productive it is. So in the end, some land, some can be built up again, maybe it's just been over farmed, but ultimately it has a good structure to it. Like there's good drainage, there's, it's not all rock or all sand. And so with some years of taking care of it, it could be good productive land. But there's a lot of land that is not good farmland. No matter what you do, you're gonna get very low production. Flooding is a big problem, and also, water access. More and more, it used to be that I've heard older, farmers, people that have farmed, 30 years ago, saying that they really could rely on rain and have good production, and it's just not that way anymore. You need irrigation to have, high harvest, a high percentage of your crops. So, yeah, so really, it's hard to get good land for a low price. But there are like sections, like maybe there's a 2-acre section that isn't useful to a large farmer, they can't get in there, and so there could be some opportunities like that as a small, needing smaller acreage that you could find potentially. But yeah, land access is a very big problem, and it's getting worse. And, yeah.
But there is also, I think, some limiting factor. If you have a small piece of land, I remember at the farmers conference, farmers conference, who is one of the African immigrant farmer who wanted a hoop house. And they were saying if you would have, I don't know, more than 6 or 7 acres, I don't remember the acreage. She had 5 acres, and she had to have a certain number of acres to get the funding for that.
Yeah, I remember that workshop. So Keefa talking about that.
Yeah. So is there some, if we get just get a small piece of land, let's say 2 acres, 3 acres, are you gonna qualify sometime for some of the funding?
Yeah, it's a good question. That is not a restriction on the hoop house. I have 2 acres in St. Paul, and I just met with NRCS, we can get a hoop house. They do them on city lots as well, but zoning can be an issue. So, or if your neighbors don't like it, that could be a problem even if you're on 40 acres. If your neighbors have a problem with the hoop house blocking their view of something, and they might not even have any legal rights to be upset at that, but it just can be a problem for your business. So there's not specifically nhưng with land size. Like I know FSA, you can get one of their farm loans even for like a lot in the city. But a lot of that is new. There's definitely more of a focus on urban agriculture now. And so NRCS, what I mentioned this, so there's Natural Resource Conservation Service, a part of USDA, and they, with FSA, just added an urban agricultural branch, and they're hiring for it right now. So that's new. So I think that will not only meet the needs of urban farmers, but small scale farmers who are farming on less than an acre, even if it's in a rural area, they have a similar need for programs that make sense on smaller scales. So so by itself, that's not a limiting factor, but that is something to think about with zoning and other limitations.
Another question I have is about just looking at the 3 steps you have, like if the goal is number 1, feasibility and sustainable business, feasible business, in step number 2, what are the most critical things they need to be looking for? What are those? Is it everything or just certain things I have to guys focus on?
Yeah, that's a good question. The feasibility. So basically, if you're wanting to just at this point assess if your farm business is going to be successful, or maybe specifically a new enterprise, that would be successful. Yeah, so that's a good question. I think, that would really come down to some of the financials. So sometimes with the plan, you're not basing it on your records, but you're basing it on the research. So that can substitute records, in the case of a feasibility study, yeah. So, yeah, less important, the vision and goals aren't as important to that, although you would want to know that it matched up with your overall farm plans. Yeah, and then I would substitute the records with research. So you want to do research and analyze. If it's just about numbers, I mean, there's, yeah, with your definitely focusing on your financials and your records to be able to say like, okay, so if we buy this, if we spend 10,000 on this piece of washing equipment, then you have to look, how many labor hours is that gonna take away? And how much more, how is our income changing? And there are, there's we just did a course with kitchen table consultants. We did a financial training, a bunch of educators in the Twin Cities, and they have some templates that are really helpful for doing that. So entering some information in. So you need your records for something specific like that, and then it will kind of print out how much money, your different numbers with that, how your income would increase, how your labor would decrease, and basically, is it a good investment? So I'm just learning to use some of those tools. But in order to use them, you would need good records. Or like if it's just, I want to buy a farm and, is it going to work? Like if I buy a farm for 300,000, what do I need to produce to make those payments? I think that's hard to do. It's hard to do that without records. I feel like in a lot of business plans, you do market research to get those numbers, but it just varies so much for farms that it's hard to just like go to the Johnny Seed catalog and use their, table for how much harvest you can expect on 100 feet of carrots. But in some cases you would need to do that, some research. Would that help?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, kind of the whole thing. Questions? So one last slide for resources. It worked once.
Try again, Katie.
There we go. Okay. So just some resources. There's plenty of business planning resources out there. I don't find them all very user friendly. So I've used this Building a Sustainable Business a lot. You can download it for free online. It's through MISA, which is a program with the University of Minnesota. It's their Sustainable Agriculture Program. And I can forward this book to Matt to share with all of you if there's interest. It's long. It's a lot of time on like your values, your vision, all of that. So that may or may not resonate with you if you want to spend time on that. The business handbook, this gets a lot more into the numbers and how it's, more in spreadsheets and charts and planning. There's state colleges do business management classes. They also used to be really hard to work with because they were just used to large scale commodity crops or livestock. But they have added quite a few new employees to do more small scale vegetable production. And I know Limo they're doing some courses, right? Some of the farmers there are doing courses right now with one of their new instructors as kind of a trial to help develop the program better. There's a cost to that. It costs about $1,500. So is often you can get a credit, or you actually do a college credit for doing it, and sometimes you can get that reimbursed. So I'm also doing business training, one-to-one, and there was the other handout, that Leslie gave. I don't think I have them. Does anyone have, one she handed out in the beginning? But basically,